Verse of the day. Today's verse of the day, we're going to talk about restoration and reconciliation. The true purpose of why Christ paid the price that he did for us. Restoration of image, of identity, that we actually become something. And so today's scriptures and verses of the day come out of my new book, Fish Food, and you can find that on Amazon. Just look up my name or look up the title of the book. And so it comes straight out of chapter 23, and it's titled Moved to Move. So we're going to jump into a couple of the reflection questions that appear at the end of that particular devotional just to get us started. And so the first one being, am I walking in forgiven life only? Or am I pursuing the fullness of newness that Christ purchased for me? How clearly can I see the areas of my own heart that need restoration before I can help others rise? In what ways has my faith been inward focused rather than a conduit for God's restoration to flow through me? And so you can see that the pinpoint focus here is on purpose of restoration, what Christ intended we become through his sacrifice. And so we're going to go ahead and jump into our scriptures for our verse of the day, and they are Isaiah 35, 5 through 6, and Luke 7, 22. And they say, starting with Isaiah 35, 5 through 6, then will the eyes of the blind be open and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. And Luke 7:22 says, he answered John's messengers, go back and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind can see, the lame can walk. Those who suffer from dreaded skin diseases are made clean. The deaf can hear. The dead are raised to life. And the good news is preached to the poor. Now, the cross has always been about the restoration of our lost value and purpose and potential. But growing up, I was taught a gospel that nearly always highlighted my sin in reference to the price that Christ paid for me. So the question that I ask here is, where does it leave you when the gospel you were taught portrays Jesus merely as a way to heaven and the price he paid as solely aimed at cleaning up the mess of your sinful mistakes? What you tend to be left with is a perspective that is entirely sin conscious. And when you live from this sin consciousness, your rational view of God becomes entirely misaligned, finding yourself only ever drawing near to him in an effort to get something from him, instead of seeking his face in an effort to reflect the nature of the one who gave up everything for your sake. And the issue that we run into is that from that sin-conscious place, your life remains self-focused. Your faith becomes dependent on circumstances rather than rooted in covenant. How you're doing becomes a product of how life is going instead of a reflection of how deeply you are abiding in him. You end up measuring your growth by behavior rather than by transformation, and your confidence by how well you perform instead of how much you've been conformed to him. But that was never the point of the cross. Jesus did not endure his fate simply to clean your slate. He came to restore your name. He didn't die to give you access to heaven someday. He died to restore your access to the Father today. The cross wasn't God's reluctant rescue plan. It was his relentless pursuit of restored relationship with you. He is not and was never a distant destination. He is the way back to the Father, the source of all life, identity, and purpose. And to walk that way is to surrender our own, to die daily to the self that sin taught us to protect, so that the new creation he birthed in us can finally now breathe. For when the gospel is seen rightly, sin no longer defines us, sonship does. And when sonship defines us, we no longer approach God to receive what it is we want. We walk with him so that the world can receive what he's already freely given. And when we read the prophecies foretelling the coming Messiah, we often stop short at their physical fulfillment. Yes, Jesus opened the blinded eyes. Yes, he caused the lame to walk. But these were not merely acts of compassion. They were declarations of restoration. Each miracle was a prophetic signpost pointing to the real fulfillment of his mission, that what sin destroyed in the garden would once again be made whole in us. In Eden, man walked with God hand in hand and looked upon his maker face to face. Sight was not hindered by shame and steps were not directed by self. We were always made to move in rhythm with his heart, to see as he saw and to walk as he walked. But when sin entered, that vision shattered. We lost the sight of who he was, and in turn we lost the sight of who we were. Blindness became our inheritance, paralysis became our posture. The human race, created to reflect God's glory, stumbled into shadow, able to move, yet directionless, alive, yet unable to walk rightly with the one who formed us. Then Christ came, clothed in flesh, carrying not just forgiveness, but restoration. He healed blind eyes to reveal his power to restore spiritual vision. He raised the lame to reveal his desire to align our steps once again with his purpose. Every miracle was the whisper of Eden being reawakened within us. He did not come only to wash the stain of sin, but to restore the sight of sons. Forgiveness opens the door, but newness of life walks through it. Forgiven life removes the guilt of separation. New life restores the intimacy that separation destroyed. Forgiven life looks to heaven for escape. New life walks with heaven here as sons and daughters restored to the Father's presence. This is the gospel in its fullness. The cross did not merely clean the slate, it renewed the image. It reopened blind eyes to see what sin had hidden. The reflection of God imprinted upon humanity from the very beginning. It straightened our crippled steps so that once again we could walk with him. In the cool of the day, hand in hand, heartbeat and step in rhythm, our eye once again singularly fixed upon him. But the question remains, are we living merely forgiven or truly renewed? Do we see the cross as the end of guilt or the beginning of restoration? For to live from forgiven life is to rejoice in what you've been freed from. But to live from newness of life is to joyfully and purposefully produce the truth of the one who freed you. The blind see and the lame walk, because now through Christ the eyes of our hearts are opened. We perceive the face of God not as distant deity, but as an indwelling reality. We walk rightly not because we've learned new rules, but because his spirit within us has made our steps sure again. This is the miracle foretold. Not that sight was given to the eyes of the flesh, but that perception was restored to the hearts of men. Not that legs regained their strength, but that mankind can once again walk in step with the living God. The cross is where Eden's distance was bridged. It is where blind eyes began to see again. It is where the lame, the spiritually crippled, the self-reliant, the sin-bound stood upright once more, clothed in the righteousness of the Son, and called back into fellowship with the Father. So open your eyes, child of God. The veil has been torn and the garden of your heart restored. The same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead now aims to take your hand and lead you forward. You were never meant to stumble in darkness, but to walk boldly in the light of his presence, seeing him rightly, reflecting him purely, and living as an undeniable evidence of his resurrection power on the earth. Now rise and walk in the light. Let your restored heart become the testimony that awakens others to the same freedom. For you were reborn not to merely behold and receive for yourself his glory, but to become its reflection, alive, radiant, and fully yielded to the purpose for which you were made.